He left her unconscious at the hospital to marry his mistress. His family celebrated. His friends cheered. Not one of them asked where she went. 3 months later, when the eviction notices arrived, for his office, his home, his mother's house, they finally understood who she really was. The hospital corridor on the 4th floor smelled like antiseptic and cold air, the kind of cold that doesn't warm up no matter how many blankets they bring you. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, and outside the window, Atlanta was glowing the way it always did at night. All orange light and distant noise, the city moving the way cities do, unbothered, not caring who was hurting inside its walls. The nurses changed shifts at 7, and the new ones came on with quiet voices and fresh purpose, and the hallway settled into the softer rhythm of a hospital at night. Somewhere down the corridor, a television murmured in someone's room. Just sound without meaning, distant and formless, making the silence in room 412 feel heavier by contrast. That was the thing about quiet when it was the wrong kind. It didn't feel like rest. It felt like something that should have been filled. Nadine Ellis had been in that bed for 2 days. She came in through the emergency room after collapsing at work, her body giving out the way a body does when it has been quietly absorbing too much for too long. The doctors called it stress-related exhaustion complicated by dehydration. They said it like it had a beginning and an end. They did not say what it really was, which was years of carrying a marriage alone, a household alone, a silence alone, the weight of a love that had stopped being reciprocal. So gradually she had not noticed the exact moment it became a thing she was doing entirely by herself. The room was quiet in a way that announced itself. No flowers on the windowsill, no card on the side table, no chair pulled close to the bed the way a worried person pulls a chair close. Just the sound of monitors and the occasional squeak of rubber shoes passing in the hallway, and the particular emptiness of a space where someone should have been and wasn't. Nadine lay still, her eyes open, watching the ceiling. She had been married to Marcus Ellis for 6 years. Today was their anniversary. She had thought about it that morning when she woke up, had thought about it in the flat, factual way you think about a date, when the feeling attached to it has already been replaced by something else. She was 34 years old. She had given this man the best years of what she had, and she was lying in a hospital bed alone, and the ceiling had nothing to say about that. She heard him before she saw him. His footsteps were always a little too firm, the walk of a man who needed rooms to know he was arriving. He pushed open the door without knocking, which he never did at home either. He had a habit of entering spaces as though they had been waiting for him. He stood in the doorway for a moment without coming in, taking in the room with the quick, practiced scan of a man who had learned to assess situations before committing to them. He was wearing his charcoal gray suit, the one she had picked out with him at the store on Peachtree 2 Christmases ago, standing in the aisle while he looked at himself in the mirror and asked what she thought, and she had said he looked like someone worth knowing, and he had laughed and bought it, and that had been a good day, a real day. She looked at the suit and thought about that store on Peachtree, and then she stopped thinking about it. He walked to the side of her bed and set a manila envelope down on the surface of the nightstand without a word. He didn't pull the chair close. He didn't sit. He stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at a spot somewhere near her shoulder, not quite her face, not quite the wall, and said quietly that she needed to sign those when she was feeling better, that his lawyer had already reviewed everything, that it was the cleanest way forward for both of them. He used the word cleanest, like the previous 6 years were a mess that a good lawyer could sort. Nadine looked at the envelope. She looked at his face. She said nothing. The door behind him pushed open wider, and his mother, Gloria, stepped into the room. Gloria had always been a large presence, not in size, but in the space she occupied, in the way sound seemed to arrange itself around her when she chose to use it. She had opinions the way some people have furniture. Everywhere, functional, not going anywhere. She crossed her arms and stood with the posture of a woman delivering a verdict she had been holding for years, waiting for the right courtroom. Her voice carried down the hallway, past the nurse's station, past 2 other rooms, with the ease of a woman who had never once in her life lowered her volume on someone else's behalf. She said that Nadine had always been strange, that she had always hidden things, that there was a coldness to her that she had never trusted, a distance that no amount of trying could close. She said Marcus deserved a real woman, a warm woman, a woman who showed up fully and without reservation. A nurse stopped in the hallway outside the door and looked in, then kept walking. Behind Gloria, half in the doorway, stood Darnell Pruitt, Marcus's best friend since college, the man who had been best man at their wedding, who had stood at a microphone 5 years ago and said with apparent sincerity that Marcus and Nadine were the kind of love story that made a man believe in the thing. He had his phone out, not raised, just out at his side, the screen angled slightly forward, a small red recording dot visible if you were looking. His mouth was doing the tight thing it did when he was trying not to smile and losing the effort. Marcus told his mother that was enough, but the way he said it wasn't a command. It was the kind of correction a man makes when he wants to be remembered as the one who said something, not the one who meant it. Gloria made a dismissive sound. Marcus straightened his tie. He picked up nothing from the room. He turned toward the door and walked out, and the sound of his footsteps faded down the corridor the way water disappears down a drain. Complete, unremarkable, gone. Gloria followed. Darnell followed, still with his phone at his side. The door swung closed behind them. By that evening, a short video clip was moving through their social circle. A few seconds of Marcus walking out of the elevator in the hospital lobby, straightening his tie, looking at his phone with the small, private smile of a man pleased about where he is going. Someone had added a caption, something about a man who had places to be. The comments filled quickly. People who had been at the wedding 5 years ago, who had eaten from the buffet and danced on the floor and hugged Nadine at the end of the night, tapping hearts on a video filmed while she lay in a room alone. Across the city, in a small private event hall near Buckhead that Brianna Colton had found and reserved months in advance, the room was warm and candlelit. 12 guests sat in chairs. Champagne waited in a row of thin glasses. Brianna stood at the front in a white dress. Marcus arrived 22 minutes after leaving the hospital. He had fixed his tie in the car. He walked to the front of the room, took her hands, and looked at her with the expression of a man beginning something new, which is one of the easiest expressions there is because it requires no memory. His friends toasted, his people cheered. Nobody mentioned the woman on the 4th floor. Not one person in that room turned to ask where she was or whether she was all right. Back in room 412, Nadine did not cry. She did not call anyone. She looked at the envelope on the nightstand for a long time. Then she reached up to her collarbone and touched a small silver pendant. A tiny key, worn smooth at the edges from years of being held between fingers. And she closed her eyes and breathed in slowly, the way her mother had taught her to breathe when the world was too loud. On the nightstand, beside the manila envelope, sat another piece of mail, forwarded that morning from her home address. The envelope was plain. The letterhead, just barely visible through the paper, read Hargrove and Associates, Estate Law Division. She had not opened it, not yet. To understand Nadine, you have to go back. Not just to the marriage, not just to the woman lying quiet in that hospital bed. You have to go all the way back to a street in a modest part of Atlanta, where the houses sat close together and the yards were small, and the neighbors knew your name and used it. A street where everything was ordinary and nothing was wasted, where women made beauty out of what they had and taught their daughters to do the same. Her mother, Ruth Ann, was a seamstress. She worked out of a back room in the house. A room that always smelled of fabric and warm iron and the faint sweetness of cedar sachets she kept in the drawers, and something else beneath it all that was harder to name. Something that smelled like competence, like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Ruth Ann could take a damaged thing and make it whole. She could hold a torn garment up to the light and trace the damage back to its source, and then she would sit down at her machine and she would correct it. And when she was done, the repair was so clean that you had to look twice to find where the break had been. She did that with clothes. She did it with people, too, in the quiet way of women who understand that most of what needs healing just needs someone to sit close and not rush it. Nadine's father, Eugene Hargrove, was a shadow in those early years. Not cruel, not dramatic, not the villain of any story Ruth Ann ever told. Just absent in the particular way some men are absent, present enough to leave an impression, gone enough that the impression was mostly made of questions. He sent money when he could, which was more regularly than it seemed at the time. Ruth Ann never said a bad word about him, not once. When Nadine asked, Ruth Ann would pause over her sewing and get a soft look that was made of several things at once. Memory and forgiveness, and something that might have been longing. And she would say only that Eugene loved in the way he knew how, and that some people's capacity for love was larger than their capacity to stay. Nadine grew up turning that sentence over in her mind, trying to find the shape of the man inside it. She grew up as the kind of girl who noticed things quietly, who sat at the back of classrooms and understood more than she raised her hand about, who made one good friend at a time and was completely present for that friend, who cried at the end of books and at certain kinds of music and at the specific look on someone's face when they are trying very hard not to cry themselves. She was gentle in the way strong things are often gentle, not because they have to be, but because they have enough that they don't need to prove anything. On the morning of her 12th birthday, she was sitting on the front porch steps with a novel when a car she didn't recognize pulled slowly to the curb. It was a clean car, unremarkable, nothing that announced itself. A tall man got out. He was well dressed in a quiet way. Good fabric, a clean watch, no jewelry, no performance. He had the kind of stillness that belongs to people who have learned how to be in the world without needing it to react to them. He walked up the path to the porch and he knelt down in front of her so that their eyes were level, and he looked at her face for a long moment, the way he looked at her, carefully, fully, like she was something he had been carrying in his mind for a long time and was finally seeing clearly. Was not the way strangers looked at you. He pressed something small and cool into her palm, a silver pendant shaped like a key on a thin chain. He folded her fingers around it and held her hand in both of his and said that one day she would know what it opened. He told her to keep it close. He told her not to let anyone make her feel small, because the people who tried to make a quiet woman feel small were always the ones who already knew how large she actually was. And that fear was their problem and not hers. Then he stood. He smiled at her once, real, brief, full of something she would spend years trying to name. He walked back to the car and drove away. She never saw Eugene Hargrove again. She carried the pendant through high school and through the scholarship that took her to the university she had circled in a brochure at 13. She wore it the night she met Marcus Ellis at a fundraiser on a rainy Thursday, when he crossed the room with that practiced, confident walk and looked at her like she was the only specific thing in a space full of general things. She had liked that. She had let herself like it. She had believed it was true. She loved him the way she did everything, completely, without performance, without a plan to withdraw it. She gave the marriage all of herself, her mornings, her patience, her income when his business stumbled, her silence when his moods needed space, her warmth when he forgot to offer his own. She was a good wife in the way that good things are good, quietly, consistently, without requiring applause. And Ruth Ann's other lesson, the one delivered through example rather than instruction, was this: a woman who knows her worth does not argue her value. She demonstrates it. She waits, if she has to, with the patience that belongs to people who are certain deep in themselves, in a place that no hand can reach. She was discharged on a Thursday morning with a folder of follow-up instructions. Ruth Ann arrived early, sitting in the waiting area in her good coat, with a paper cup of coffee and the particular expression of a mother who is managing everything she wants to say while she waits to know her child is solid enough to hear it. She had come across the city in the early morning gray and sat in that waiting area for 40 minutes before anyone told her Nadine was ready. She did not complain about any of it. She kept the radio on low during the drive home. Gospel, soft and steady, the kind of music that holds you without requiring anything from you in return. When they turned onto the block and pulled up to the house, Nadine saw the boxes before she said anything. 4 of them, stacked on the front porch, taped and labeled in handwriting that was not Marcus's. Nadine's winter coats, her books, the framed photograph of Ruth Ann from 20 years ago, bubble-wrapped and placed on top of the pile with a care that felt like an insult. The careful packaging of someone who wanted to seem thoughtful while making you leave. Ruth Ann looked at the boxes. She looked at her daughter. She said nothing because there was nothing that language was built to handle in that moment. Nadine carried the boxes to the car herself. All 4 of them. In the weeks that followed, Brianna moved through the house like a renovation project. New curtains, new art on the walls, a different rug in the living room, a reorganized kitchen, different towels in the bathrooms, small choices, dozens of them, each one a quiet overwrite. Within 2 weeks, the house looked like Nadine had been removed from it with professional thoroughness. Brianna had a talent for redecorating that was really a talent for erasing. She knew which details made a space feel like it belonged to someone, and she replaced them one by one, patiently, until the house forgot. The story she had been constructing about Nadine was careful and layered, and had been stress-tested in private before it was ever said aloud. She told Marcus that Nadine had hidden financial instability, debts, undisclosed obligations, accounts that didn't add up. She framed Nadine's quietness as concealment, her privacy as deception, her patience as coldness. She presented paperwork, some of it real and some of it not, with the calm confidence of a woman who knew that a man looking for permission would not look too closely at the evidence. Marcus believed her, not because the story was airtight, because believing it was easier than the alternative. That was the thing that hurt, in the way the deepest hurts hurt. Not that Brianna had lied, because Brianna was always going to lie, but that Marcus, after 6 years of a woman's full and uncalculating love, had believed it without one phone call, without one question directed at her, without one moment of sitting across from the woman he had promised things to and asking, "Is this true?" Gloria moved through her church, her neighborhood, her family, with the story tucked under her arm like a pamphlet. Nadine had always been strange, she said, a coldness that no amount of effort could close. The neighborhood absorbed it and passed it along the way neighborhoods do, through the soft machinery of long acquaintance and proximity. Darnell continued positioning himself as loyal to Marcus while running a quiet operation in the background, using Marcus's name and his new connections through Brianna's family to build a side arrangement he had no intention of sharing. He brought Marcus news about Nadine, filtered and shaped to confirm whatever Marcus needed to believe that week. He was the kind of friend who was most useful to himself, and Marcus, distracted and newly established in something he hadn't fully examined, never thought to question the particular shape of Darnell's helpfulness. In Ruth Ann's house, in the small bedroom with the window facing the neighbor's fence, Nadine went somewhere inside herself. Ruth Ann recognized it. It was not depression and it was not grief. It was the place a woman goes when she is done spending energy on things that cannot be changed and is beginning very quietly to account for everything that is actually hers. Ruth Ann had seen her own mother go there once. She came back from it carrying herself differently, like something had been put down that did not need to be picked up again. One evening, in the third week, Nadine sat at the small kitchen table under the overhead light and found the Hargrove and Associates envelope at the bottom of her bag. She looked at it. Then she opened it. She read it once. Then she set it flat on the table and read it again from the beginning. Eugene Hargrove had passed away 6 weeks before her hospitalization. He had done so quietly, without announcement, in the way he had apparently done everything. He had spent 40 years building a real estate portfolio across 12 states, commercial buildings, residential complexes, mixed-use developments, land holdings in cities that were growing faster than anyone had predicted. He had built it methodically and without fanfare, the way you build something when you understand that real power has no reason to introduce itself. The estate was valued at the time of the letter at $15 billion. Nadine Hargrove was his sole heir, named in a will filed and sealed 15 years ago when she was 19, 2 years after that birthday on the porch steps, by a man who had not been able to stay but had never stopped knowing who she was. She set the letter down. She looked at it for a long moment. She picked up the pendant and held it between her thumb and forefinger, smooth and familiar against her skin. She did not cry. She did not celebrate. She picked up her phone and called the number at the bottom of the letter. Theodore Hargrove answered on the second ring. His voice was warm and steady and carried in it something that sounded like a long exhale, the relief of a man who had been waiting for a call for a very long time. He said he was glad she had reached out, that everything was ready, that they would move at whatever pace she needed. Nadine told him she was fine. She told him to tell her what she needed to do. Something in her eyes changed. Something closed that had been open too long, and something else opened that had been closed long enough. The Hargrove Foundation Annual Real Estate Gala was held on the third Friday of January at a venue in Midtown Atlanta that the city's business community knew on sight, a historic building with high ceilings and marble floors and the kind of architecture that communicates longevity without saying a word about it. The kind of building that made people stand up straighter when they walked in, not because anything required it, but because the space itself suggested it. By 7 o'clock, the room was full of the people who moved real money through real decisions: developers, attorneys, city planners, foundation directors, the quiet, serious people who build and manage the things that everyone else lives and works inside. The conversations were the kind that happened in rooms like this. Careful, measured, full of information, moving sideways between what was said and what was meant. Marcus Ellis had been invited through Brianna's family connection to a development firm that had been angling for Hargrove partnerships for 2 years without landing one. To Marcus, it represented exactly what he had been working toward: access, proximity, a room that opened other rooms. He wore a new navy suit. He had his cards in the inside pocket. He was ready in the way he was always ready. At the surface, with confidence, with the particular ease of a man who had learned that if you walked into a room like you belonged, most rooms would not argue the point. He found his footing quickly, recognizing 2 men near the bar from a development conference the previous spring, and easing into conversation with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years learning to belong in spaces not designed with him in mind. He moved through the early part of the evening the way he moved through most things, forward with purpose, not looking too carefully at what was behind him. He felt like things were moving correctly. He felt, in the way a man feels things when he is not paying close enough attention, like he belonged here. He was mid-conversation when he noticed the shift. It was not a sound, not a signal. The way temperature changes before you can name it. Small movements at the periphery, heads turning toward the back of the room. A ripple of attention moving forward through the crowd, like something was approaching that the room recognized before he did. Voices dropped a half-register. Conversations paused without concluding. The MC stepped to the podium and asked for attention. He spoke briefly about the Hargrove Foundation, its history, its footprint across 12 states, the 40 years of work its founder had put into building something that outlasted every trend. He honored Eugene Hargrove with the measured, genuine reverence of a man who had actually admired him. And then he said that it was his honor to introduce to the public, for the very first time, the sole heir to the Hargrove estate, the principal owner of the Hargrove Real Estate Group, and the new executive director of the foundation. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. She walked in without rushing. That was the first thing the room absorbed, the complete and deliberate absence of hurry. She wore a structured black gown with clean lines, nothing decorative except a single piece of jewelry at her collarbone, a small silver pendant on a thin chain. She moved through the room with the steady, unhurried grace of someone who has been walking toward this particular moment for a long time, without necessarily knowing its exact address, and the 12 members of the Hargrove Foundation board, seated at the long table to the left of the stage, rose from their chairs as she passed. Not all at once, one by one, like something was pulling them upright that they had not decided to do. The MC said her name into the microphone. Nadine Hargrove. The glass in Marcus Ellis's hand stopped exactly where it was. The two men beside him took a small, involuntary half-step back. The adjustment of people realizing they have been standing next to something they had not properly assessed. Brianna's glass stopped halfway between the table and her mouth and remained there. At a side table near the wall, Gloria sat with her hands folded in her lap and a look on her face made of many things arriving at once. Recognition, recalculation, and the weight of understanding several things she had chosen not to understand while she still had the option. Nadine took the podium. She thanked the room. She spoke about her father, what he had built, why he had built it, what she understood now about the patience and the long view a man needs to create something that genuinely lasts. She talked about what she intended to do with the foundation going forward. Every word was true and carefully placed, and the room gave her its complete attention, the way rooms give attention to people who have earned it. And then she paused. She found his face. She had to look for a moment. He had shifted slightly from where he'd been standing, moved a half step back in the unconscious way a person moves when they need something solid behind them. She found him and she held his gaze. 3 seconds. No anger in it, no performance, no message that required words. Just the steady, clear, entirely calm look of a woman letting a man know that she has always seen him. That she saw him when he walked into that hospital room, that she saw him in every room they had ever shared together, that the seeing had never been the limitation. It had always been his. Then she turned back to the room and she smiled, real, unhurried, the smile of someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be. And she finished. Theodore stepped forward for the final portion of the presentation. He confirmed, for the members of the press in attendance, several specific details about the estate's holdings. Among the properties currently in the Hargrove portfolio, 3 commercial buildings leased to a consulting group, whose vice president of development was one Marcus Ellis, the private event hall in Buckhead, where a small private wedding had been held in October, and a residential building in the Decatur area, Unit 214, occupied for the past 9 years by a tenant named Gloria Ellis. all 3 leases, Theodore noted, with the professional neutrality of a man whose job was facts rather than drama, were coming up for standard 30-day review. The room absorbed this information in the way rooms absorb things that are large and quiet and permanent, not with noise, with the silence of people understanding something they will not forget. Marcus stood in the middle of all of it and could not find a place to put his hands. The version of the world he had been living in, the one where he had done a sensible thing and moved forward cleanly and was now in a room on the rise, was adjusting itself around him without his permission, without his input, with the complete indifference of reality toward the feelings of the people it corrects. He was standing in a building that belonged to her. He had been married to her for 6 years and had not known. He had walked out of her hospital room and had not known. He had celebrated without her and had not known. And now the room was full of people who did. The 30 days that followed did not unfold like a scene. That was the particular quality of what happened to Marcus Ellis. It had no drama in it, no confrontation, no moment where someone looked him in the face and told him what he had lost. It happened the way administrative processes happen, which is the worst way for a proud man to be reduced, correctly, impersonally, and without anyone available to receive his anger. His employer's parent company was absorbed into a portfolio restructuring following the Hargrove Group's acquisition of connected commercial properties. His position, Vice President of Development, a title he had worked 12 years to reach, was eliminated in a standard organizational realignment. The letter from HR cited business reasons and contained correct severance figures. It was signed by someone 2 states away who did not know his name before signing it. He was walked out by a woman from office management who handled the process with complete courtesy and zero knowledge of who he was or what he had done. He tried 3 times to reach Naen through a lawyer hired with money he was already beginning to run short of. Each contact received a prompt, thorough response from Theodore Hargrove's office, addressing every legal point precisely and containing nothing personal. No word from her voice, no message from her hands. She had given him access to everything she had for 6 years. She was not giving him access now. Brianna saw the mathematics before Marcus finished doing the arithmetic. That was always her gift, exits correctly timed. Within 3 weeks of the gala, she had reorganized her life in a new direction toward a commercial developer she had met at a conference in Charlotte, who was interested in things that were growing rather than collapsing. She left without a scene, with a moving truck and a forwarding address and the efficiency of a woman who had never been confused about what she was there for. She took the furniture she had chosen, the art she had selected, the version of the house she had constructed. She left Marcus in a space that looked residential and felt like the end of something, and she did not look back because people who were built for transition were not built for looking back. He called Darnell because that was the reflex. 10 years of calling Darnell when things went wrong. Darnell answered the first 2 times. The 3rd time the call went to voicemail and was never returned. Darnell was dealing with the implosion of a side arrangement he had been building using Marcus's name and connections. Connections now worth considerably less than they had been 90 days prior, and the arrangement unwinding with the speed of things that were never built on anything solid. He surfaced briefly on social media to post something that was clearly about Marcus without naming him, something about loyalty being a one-way street and about recognizing when you had been used as a ladder by someone who was no longer climbing. Their mutual circle watched with the uncomfortable fascination of people who had seen this coming and were now watching it arrive. Gloria received the non-renewal notice on a Wednesday morning. A plain envelope from the Hargrove leasing office. It stated that the lease on Unit 214 would not be renewed at the conclusion of the current term, and that the office was available for any questions regarding the transition It had a contact name and a phone number, and that was all. There was no personal note, no explanation beyond the standard language. It was not cruel. It was not personal. It was the kind of document that has no face on it, which is harder to fight than cruelty because there is nothing to push back against, no one to appeal to, nothing but the process completing itself. She called Marcus. He picked up, and she could hear in his voice that he was already empty of things to offer her. The specific flatness of a man who has run out of answers and knows it. She called the leasing office. The woman who answered was helpful, courteous, and referred her to the estate's legal team for anything beyond the standard process. There was no one to be angry at in a way that would change anything, no decision to appeal to, only the weight of what was true, settling into its final position without asking anyone's permission, without requiring anyone's approval. None of it came from anger. Nadine had not moved pieces. She had not engineered any consequence for any specific person. She had simply stepped into her own name, her own ground, and stopped cushioning the fall of people who had chosen to stand in places they had no right to. The weight of what was always true had arrived at its natural destination. That was all. That was everything. Winter let go of Atlanta slowly that year, not all at once, but in small daily surrenders. A warm afternoon, a magnolia branch blooming early, the morning light shifting from flat gray to something that had gold in it. By the end of February, the birds were back in the oak tree behind Ruth Ann's house, loud and certain, conducting their business without concern for who was listening. Nadine had started leaving her bedroom window open again. Ruth Ann noticed the first morning it happened and didn't say anything, just felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since October. The small signs are the real signs. Everything else is theater. On a Saturday morning in early March, they sat together on the back porch. 2 chairs angled toward the yard, 2 cups of coffee, the wet grass catching the early light and holding it the way wet things hold light in the morning, briefly, completely, before it shifts. No schedule, no phone calls expected. The city was beginning its weekend sounds in the distance, and here on this porch it was only the birds and the coffee and the kind of silence that exists between 2 people who have known each other long enough that quiet is not absence, but a different form of presence. Nadine had the pendant in her palm. She had unclipped it from the chain, which she almost never did, and she was turning it over slowly the way she had turned things over her whole life, attentively without rushing toward a conclusion. The morning light moved across the silver surface. Ruth Ann watched her daughter and did not ask. After a while, Nadine said that she used to think the key was literal, a door somewhere her father had meant for her to find. She had carried that half-thought in the back of her mind for over 20 years, the idea that eventually she would find the specific thing it unlocked. She said she knew now she had been thinking about it wrong, that it was simpler and larger than that at the same time. He had pressed it into her hand when she was 12 years old, a man who could not stay but who knew exactly who she was. And what he was telling her was this: the thing worth protecting was not in any building or any account or any inherited deed. It was in her. It had always been in her. The key was never for a door. The key was for herself. Ruth Ann was quiet for a moment. Then she said that sounded about right. Nadine put the pendant back on. The first program she announced through the foundation was a scholarship initiative in Atlanta for young women from working-class neighborhoods, first-generation college students, the daughters of seamstresses and night-shift nurses, and all the women who built the quiet infrastructure of other people's lives and received credit in the form of silence. She had been thinking about it since the night Theodore first walked her through the full scope of the estate. She named it the Ruth Ann Ellis Scholarship Fund. She had done it first and told her mother after because she knew Ruth Ann would say it was too much, and she knew her mother would be wrong about that. Ruth Ann cried for about 10 minutes and then composed herself and said that Nadine really didn't have to do all of that. Nadine said she knew. She had done it anyway. Ruth Ann went inside to start breakfast, which was her way of ending things that had moved her further than she wanted to show. Nadine stayed on the porch. She did not think about Marcus, not with satisfaction, not with residue. There was simply nothing there when she looked in that direction, just the clean, neutral quiet of something set down completely. She had been putting it down long before she knew she was doing it. Ruth Ann came back out with a fresh cup and set it on the small table between their chairs without being asked. The oak tree shifted in a light wind, and a few early blossoms came loose and drifted down into the wet grass below, slow and white and unhurried. Some people spend their whole lives trying to make a quiet woman feel small. They look at her stillness and call it weakness. They look at her patience and call it emptiness. They take and tell themselves she has nothing left to protect, that she would have spoken up by now if she had anything worth protecting. They never stop to consider the possibility that she was quiet because she was certain that the silence was never the absence of something. It was the presence of something so large and so settled and so completely hers that it had no need to announce itself to anyone. And patience, real patience, the kind that lives in a person who knows exactly who they are, does not wait forever. It waits correctly, and when it moves everything. She never begged him to stay. She never chased anyone who walked away. She just knew who she was, and she waited for the world to catch up. If this story moved you, if you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, hit that like button right now. Subscribe, because we tell these stories for the people who stayed quiet when they had every right to speak, and drop a comment below. What was the moment you realized she was always going to win? We read every single one.